Now, I promised you last week that this week we were going to say a word or two about Augustine, and it's here Irenaeus is going to offer for us the first and the clearest Eastern theology of the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And so Augustine is going to write on this also, about 2 centuries after this. They're going to disagree. Augustine obviously had not read his Irenaeus well. For Augustine, and ultimately what the West, and one of the reasons I'm emphasizing this is because a theology of the fall becomes very important then for how we view mankind, and it becomes a foundation for how we view lots of other things. And so a difference in this is going to cause a difference, and it's one of the differences between East and West to this very day. This is going to form some of the backdrop for debates on the Immaculate Conception. It's going to talk about original sin. It's going to talk about all sorts of things, and it all comes back to right here. For Augustine writing in the 5th century, when God made Adam and Eve, He made them absolutely perfect. He made them complete with every physical gift, every mental gift, every spiritual gift that human beings could possibly have. And so, when Adam and Eve make the choice to disobey God, they're exercising their free will to willfully disobey what they absolutely know to be right. They know God's right, and they're willfully doing it anyway. They're being disobedient to an explicit command of God. Since it's a fault of their own free will, Augustine says, what happens then to them and ultimately to us is Adam and Eve and ultimately us, bear not just the consequences, the expulsion from paradise, but we also bear the guilt. Adam and Eve are responsible for this. And for Augustine, so are we. This is the start of Catholic guilt, right here. Irenaeus, writing earlier, is going to say something ever so slightly different. Adam and Eve are not made absolutely perfect, he says. In essence, Irenaeus looks on them as inexperienced kids. You know, they're still learning how to go about things. They are not given every possible physical, mental, and spiritual gift. They're given what they need. And so, when the fall happens, it's not this willful, with full knowledge, disobedience, rejection, rebellion against God. It's a mistake. They've goofed up. Adam and Eve bear the consequences, and so do we. But for Irenaeus, they don't, and we don't, bear the guilt. Irenaeus has nothing in here about any guilt or any responsibility. The responsibility lies with the deceiver who deceived Adam and Eve into disobeying God. This is going to lead to some consequences down the road, because it's going to, this whole Western concept of original sin and this so-called stain on the soul that the West loves to talk about flows out of Augustine, and the East doesn't understand any of this because they say, but Irenaeus doesn't say this. What are you talking about? For Irenaeus, the fall is almost a necessary act. Adam and Eve almost have to fall so that they and we can realize we are not complete in ourselves. We don't have every gift. We are finite beings, and ultimately we depend on God for our life and for all of these gifts, not on ourselves. In a sense, for Augustine, it's a shock that Adam and Eve just don't fall into pride at how gloriously wonderful they are. For Irenaeus and the East, they're going to look at this in a very different light. Athanasius. Athanasius of Alexandria lives from roughly 295 to 373. Realize the crossroads that he lives in. When he's born, and for about the first 20 years of his life, being a follower of Jesus Christ is still a capital crime. He could be arrested and executed simply for that fact. That changes in about 312. And from then on, now it's not a capital crime, and the church is able to come out from underground. This all comes about because of the decision, well, because of a vision of the Emperor Constantine. And with Constantine, things begin to change. As his name implies, Athanasius is Egyptian. His original texts are written both in Coptic and in Greek. So, if anyone knows their Coptic, they can make sense of some of that. Fortunately, we have translations as well. In 325, as a deacon, he accompanies his bishop to the Council of Nicaea. Remember, again, at that point, the church has only been above ground for just over a decade. When the bishops and the fathers go into the Council of Nicaea, the records, the eyewitness accounts of the time describe a group of men still bearing the marks of their persecution. Some of the bishops were blind. Some of them were missing limbs. Most of them had been tortured at some point. And these are the men now being called into council to decide on the great matters of the day. And that great debate has to do with the teaching of another Egyptian priest by the name of Arius. And the question that has come up is, who exactly is Jesus Christ? What is he? Is he a holy man and nothing more? Is he God made flesh? Is he an angel? Is he God that has put on some kind of illusion so that we can see him? Who was this? Who do we say that Jesus is? For Arius, God the Father is the only God. He is the only uncreated, always existing God. Jesus, though existing before time, is a creation. God the Father made him. He might be the very first thing made. He might be the greatest of all the things God made, but he's not God. He's more than man, but he's not God. This has caused a huge debate and a huge fight at that time. And so now the council has been gathered to debate this, to try to figure out who's right. And they're going to look at Scripture, they're going to look at the writings of the earlier fathers, and they're going to debate this. Arius himself, by the way, dies at the Council of Nicaea. His followers carry on, but Arius dies. Athanasius is one of the great champions, though. The council decides that Arius is wrong. And the council comes up with a fancy Greek word to say that the Father and the Son are homoousios. Homoousios has something of the same root of homogenized. Think of milk. When you go buy milk, it's homogenized. And that means, what does homogenized mean?
It's mixed.
It's the same. A whole bunch of different milks have been put into together and stirred up so that we get one mix. Well, homoousios means here that they are one and the same stuff. That the Father and the Son are one in essence. Exactly what our creed says to this very day. That the Son is consubstantial with the Father. So the council then is going to teach that all three persons of the Holy Trinity are equal and uncreated. Athanasius becomes the great spokesman, the great defender of the teachings of the Council of Nicaea. And his most famous work on this is something called On the Incarnation of Christ. He goes home. Remember, the council is in 325. In 328, he himself gets elected archbishop, and he faces constant attacks from the followers of Arius. But he goes on to defend the full divinity of Christ, because the divinity of Christ leads to the divinization, the deification of mankind. He is boldly going to assert God became man so that man might become God. This is not a brand new idea. You can find the roots of this in Scripture itself in the epistles of St. Peter. He's going to talk about the same thing, and this is why the council decides to go this way and not side with Arius. Athanasius writes, "For the flesh did not diminish the glory of the Word, far be the thought. On the contrary, it was glorified by him. Nor because the Son that was in the form of God took upon himself the form of a servant was he deprived of his Godhead. On the contrary, he has thus become the deliverer of all flesh and of all creation. And if God sent his Son, brought forth from a woman, that fact causes us no shame, but on the contrary, glory and great grace. For he has become man, that he might deify us in himself, that we may henceforth become a holy race and partakers of the divine nature, as St. Peter wrote in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 4.